The village that existed only in dreams. There are places in this world that seem to live only in the hushed whispers of night. Places that cannot be found on any map or traced by any compass. Places that seem to slip like smoke between the fingers of memory, and at the heart of such mysteries is a village spoken of only in fragments and fading recollections. A village that many claim to have visited but only in their dreams. A place that feels both impossibly real and impossibly unreal. A paradox wrapped in silence and moonlight. And this village is where our story begins, in a land where the edges of reality blur with imagination. Where dreams do not merely vanish when you wake, but leave behind the lingering fragrance of familiarity, as though you had truly walked its winding paths, touched its weathered stone walls, and breathed the cool air that carried the scent of lantern, oil, and rain-damp earth. And in this village, time does not pass in the way we know it. 4 clocks do not tick, and calendars do not turn, but rather the hours move like tides, swelling and receding with the pulse of dreams themselves, and those who stumble upon it often describe the same first sight. A narrow bridge, made of pale wood, stretching across a stream that flows without sound, its waters shimmering, not with sunlight, but with something softer, like liquid moonlight. And as you cross that bridge, your heart slows, your thoughts quiet, and you feel as though the world outside has already been forgotten, as if the weight you carried in your waking life has slipped from your shoulders. And when you step onto the cobbled road that leads into the village, you realize you are somewhere that remembers you, even if you do not remember it. Somewhere that feels like a home you once left behind in another life. The houses rise gently from the earth, their roofs tiled with dark slate that glimmers with dew. Lanterns hang from every doorway, casting warm halos across the paths, and no matter how many times people describe it, they always recall the same curious detail. The lanterns never go out, no matter how fierce the rain or how strong the wind. They burn with a steady flame that seems not of oil or fire, but of memory itself, and perhaps that is why the village feels so alive, because every lantern carries within it a dream once forgotten, a dream once lost, now flickering eternally in gentle defiance of the silence beyond the hills. And as you wander deeper, you notice the villagers, though not quite in the way you expect. For some say they are people dressed in simple robes, with faces serene and welcoming. Others claim they appear more like silhouettes, outlines of those we have known, loved, or lost, shimmering like shadows upon the walls of memory. And though their shapes may differ, all who have been there agree that the villagers are not strangers, but fragments of familiarity, people you once knew or might have known, people who carry with them an echo of your laughter, your tears, your most intimate longings, and they greet you as though you belong, as though you have returned after a long absence, though you cannot recall ever being there before. And this is the enchantment of the dream village. It lures you not with novelty, but with the comfort of recognition. It is the place where your forgotten dreams go when you awaken, a sanctuary for all the hopes you abandoned, the wishes you buried, and the moments you never lived but secretly desired. And in the village, they are alive, breathing, waiting for you to remember them. Lanterns swaying in the night air as though whispering your own lost name. The sound of their gentle flicker harmonizing with the silence of the streets. And everywhere you go, you feel watched, not by malice, but by memory, as though every corner holds a reflection of something once dear, and yet the village is never still. for the sky above it is always shifting, sometimes painted with the hues of a dawn that never fully arrives, sometimes cloaked in the deep indigo of eternal twilight. The stars there are unlike ours, not sharp or distant but close, vast and tender. Their glow like the pulse of a heartbeat. And as you breathe beneath that sky, you realize you are inside the dream of the world itself, walking through the imagination of creation, a place built not of stone or soil, but of longing, hope, and memory. And though you try to grasp its streets, in your mind, they shift when you turn away, bending like smoke, always familiar, but never fixed. And perhaps that is why no two dreamers recall the same path, though all recall the same feeling. The feeling of belonging to something beyond themselves, of being stitched into the fabric of forgotten dreams, and there in the heart of the village, beyond the twisting alleys and the fragrant gardens where flowers bloom even without soil, there stands the great square, where a fountain spills not water but shimmering fragments of light, droplets that rise and fall in slow motion, as if reluctant to leave the sky. And around this fountain gather the lantern keepers, guardians of the village, who are neither young nor old, but wear faces that seem woven of every age at once, their eyes deep wells reflecting countless forgotten nights. Their voices hushed but filled with weight as they speak not in words but in feelings, reminding you of what you have lost, of what you still yearn for. And as you stand before them, you realize that the lanterns are not mere ornaments of beauty but vessels, each one holding the unfulfilled dream of someone who has walked this earth. Each one, a fragment of desire too fragile to survive the waking world but too precious to be destroyed. And so the village gathers them, protects them, and keeps them burning. And as you walk among them, you may find your own dream glowing quietly. In a corner, a lantern whose flame leans toward you when you draw near, its light soft but insistent, tugging at your soul like a memory you almost remember but not quite. And if you dare to touch it, you will feel your heart ache with both sorrow and joy. For in its glow you will see the life you once wished for, the roads you never took, the love you lost, the moments you prayed would last forever. And though you cannot hold on to it when you awaken, for the lantern will remain in the village long after you leave, its flame will follow you back, hidden in the recess of your chest, making your waking hours feel a little less empty. And though the world will tell you it was only a dream, you will know the truth. You will know that there exists a village, where dreams live on, where nothing truly vanishes, where memory itself becomes light. And you will know that you will return again when night carries you back across that bridge of pale wood, back to the lanterns that never go out, back to the forgotten village that remembers you better than you remember yourself. The village that existed only in dreams, the next night arrived with an almost expectant silence, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the traveler to close his eyes again, waiting for him to return to the strange and beautiful village that seemed to exist beyond the veil of waking life. And as he lay down beneath the canopy of stars, the cool night air carrying the smell of damp earth, he felt an almost magnetic pull toward sleep. And soon enough, he found himself standing once again at the entrance to the same mysterious village, the lanterns burning brighter than ever, their soft golden glow spilling across the cobblestones in rippling waves, as if each light had its own heartbeat, guiding him deeper into the heart of this dreamlike place. And this time, the villagers seemed to have been waiting for him. their faces so oddly familiar yet impossible to place, filled with warmth and quiet recognition. As though he was not an outsider but a long-expected guest, finally coming home. And one of them, a woman with hair like woven silver threads that shimmered in the lantern light, stepped forward and handed him a small clay cup filled with a liquid that smelled faintly of honey and lavender. And when he drank, he felt a sudden clarity wash over him, like the fog of his waking mind had been lifted. And with it came the realization that this place was not bound by time in the way the real world was, for here, moments stretched into eternities, and eternities collapsed into moments, and in that bending of time he felt his heart beating in rhythm with the entire village, each light, each breath, each shadow playing upon the walls of the stone houses. And he wondered aloud, though not with his lips but with his thoughts, what this village truly was, and why it had chosen him of all people to wander through its winding streets. And the woman with silver hair simply smiled and said, not with sound but with a voice that seemed to bloom directly inside his chest, that the village was a mirror of forgotten dreams, a place built from the fragments of wishes, regrets, and hopes left behind by countless souls, and that only those who were willing to listen deeply enough, who carried the weight of unspoken questions, could stumble upon it in the fragile hours of slumber. And as she spoke, the traveler noticed how the walls of the houses flickered faintly, as though they were made not of stone but of memory itself, shifting and reshaping with every passing thought. And suddenly he realized that even the lanterns seemed alive, each flame carrying within it not just light but entire stories, whispering secrets of people he had never met, or perhaps people he had forgotten, their laughter and sorrow weaving through the air like invisible threads binding him closer to the place. And so he wandered deeper into the village, each step echoing with a resonance he could not explain, until he found himself at a vast square where a great fountain stood, its waters glimmering like liquid moonlight, and within its rippling depths he saw not his reflection but a vision of himself, as a child, sitting alone beneath a tree, staring at the horizon as though waiting for something that never came. And the vision struck him with such force that he stumbled back, his heart trembling, and the villagers who had gathered around the fountain nodded silently, as though to say that the village always reveals the pieces of oneself that were long buried, and that the traveler's journey here was not one of simple exploration but of remembering, of gathering what he had left behind across the years. And as the fountain's waters rippled, he saw more. He saw the face of someone he had once loved and lost, their smile frozen in time, their voice faint as though carried away by wind. And though tears formed in his eyes, he felt no grief in this place, only a profound stillness, as though the pain itself was being cradled by the village, soothed by its timeless light. And the woman with silver hair placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering that here, even sorrow was welcomed, because every forgotten dream carried within it the seeds of healing. And as he looked around, he noticed the villagers lighting more lanterns, setting them adrift into the air where they floated, like stars breaking free from the earth. And each lantern carried a fragment of memory, a fragment of longing. And he realized then that the entire sky above the village was filled with them, billions upon billions of lanterns rising higher and higher, forming constellations that were not of stars but of human dreams, a galaxy of forgotten hopes shimmering in eternal night, and overwhelmed by the beauty of it. The traveler whispered that he wished he could stay forever, that he wished this village were real. And the woman with silver hair simply smiled with a softness that seemed older than time, and said that perhaps it was more real than the waking world. For dreams have always built the foundations of reality, and without them, the world would collapse into emptiness. And though he wanted to ask more, he suddenly felt the faint tug of waking, a breeze pulling him backward, the lanterns fading into distant sparks, the fountain dissolving into mist, and before he could grasp it, he opened his eyes beneath the same canopy of stars, the night around him eerily silent, as though the earth itself had hidden away the secret he had just glimpsed. And yet, in his hand, impossibly, he still held the clay cup from the village, its rim still wet with the taste of honey and lavender, proof that the village was no mere dream. And as he sat up with trembling fingers, he realized his life had changed forever, for he now carried a piece of the village within him, and he knew that when he closed his eyes again, the lanterns would be waiting, whispering stories that begged to be remembered. And so, with the veil between slumber and waking life thinning, the traveler found himself wandering deeper into the heart of the dream village, guided by a melody so faint it felt as though it had been stitched into the very fabric of night itself, each note echoing like a half-forgotten lullaby, drawing him past the crooked lanes where the shadows of willow trees bent low in solemn reverence, and the houses tilted toward one another as if whispering secrets from centuries gone, their wooden beams groaning with the weight of unspoken stories. And the traveler, though uncertain if his feet touched soil or clouds, pressed on, following the gentle rise and fall of lanterns glowing in soft amber, their lights swaying as though stirred by invisible hands, carrying with them the scent of memory and the breath of lost time. And as he walked further, he realized that every step seemed to take him both forward and backward at once, as though he was retracing the steps of someone who had walked these paths before, someone who might have been him, or perhaps someone who had long since disappeared into the folds of dream. And he wondered then if the village existed not only in his imagination, but in the imagination of all who had ever dared to believe that forgotten places could still hold meaning. And perhaps that was why the air felt so heavy yet kind, like the silence of a library of souls, each dwelling radiating warmth, even though no figures stood by the windows. For it seemed the village was alive in its stillness, carrying the presence of those who had once loved, laughed, and wept here, there. Voices hidden in the rustle of the leaves, and the slow trickle of a stream that wound its way like silver ribbon through the center of the town, catching fragments of starlight and lantern flame until the whole river shimmered like a mirror of eternity. And the traveler bent to gaze into it, finding not his reflection but the faces of strangers smiling gently, their eyes soft with recognition, as if they knew him better than he knew himself. And when he looked up again, a small bridge had appeared that had not been there before, its arches made of smooth stone worn down by footsteps he could not account for, footsteps of dreamers who might have come before him, or who might still arrive long after he departed. And as he crossed, he heard the first voice since arriving in the village, low and melodic, rising not from a person but from the air itself, a whisper that spoke his name with tenderness, assuring him that he was meant to be here, that this village had waited for him as much as he had unknowingly longed for it. And the sound filled his chest with both longing and peace, as though the journey he had carried all his life The restless search for a place that would understand him had finally drawn to its destined harbor. Yet he could not shake the feeling that every lantern was more than just a light, that within each flickering flame lived a dream left behind, a wish unfulfilled, or perhaps the memory of someone who had once hoped too fiercely, and the longer he walked, the more he felt the pull of those flames, as if they were alive and watching him, waiting for him to listen, to unravel the forgotten threads of longing they carried. And he thought then of how strange it was that people in waking life feared dreams, calling them fragile illusions, when here in this village dreams were not fragile at all. They were the foundations of roads, the mortar of walls, the breath of air itself, more real than stone or wood. And as the traveler continued down the winding path, he knew that he had only brushed the surface of this world, that deeper still lay the secrets of why the village existed only in dreams, and why it had chosen to reveal itself to him. And in that moment he realized he could not turn back, for turning back meant waking, and waking meant losing this place forever. So he pressed forward into the unfolding mystery, his heart trembling with both fear and wonder, knowing that what lay ahead would change him, not only within this dream, but in every waking hour to come. The traveler walked deeper into the dream-forged village, and though no footsteps echoed, the silence itself seemed to carry his presence like ripples across still water. And he felt as though the houses leaned closer with every turn, their doors slightly ajar, as if inviting him to step inside, yet none revealed what lay within, for this was a place where curiosity was tested, where patience mattered more than desire. And as he passed beneath an arch of vines heavy with blossoms that glowed faintly under the lantern light, he noticed the petals falling without ever touching the ground, dissolving into sparks that rose upward as though dreams, once shed, never fell into ruin but instead returned to the skies to be born anew. And this thought filled him with an ache that was neither sorrow nor joy, but something gentler, recognition that all things lost were not truly gone, merely transformed, waiting to return in another shape. And the melody he had followed earlier swelled again, weaving through the narrow lanes, a song without words but full of meaning, carrying him toward the village square, where a fountain stood at the center, though no water flowed from it, only a slow trickle of light, golden threads winding upward, twisting and vanishing into the night. And he approached, drawn to the glow, and in its surface he saw not only his reflection but the overlapping reflections of countless others, faces blurred by time yet distinct enough to remind him that he was part of something vast, that the village did not belong to him alone, but to every dreamer who had ever wandered into its embrace. And as he leaned closer, he heard 1,000 whispers at once, voices of strangers and loved ones alike, telling him not to fear, that the journey was not about finding a destination but about remembering the truth that had always slept within him. And when he pulled back, the fountain's glow pulsed brighter, and a pathway opened behind it, lined with lanterns that rose higher than the houses, towering like trees of fire, their flames moving as though alive, bending toward him with unspoken recognition. And he realized then that the village was guiding him toward something greater, a place beyond its quiet streets, a heart hidden at its core, where the origin of its eternal dream lay waiting. And though part of him trembled with doubt, wondering what would happen if he stepped too far, If he uncovered a secret not meant for mortal hearts, another part urged him forward, whispering that the answers he sought had been calling him long before he ever closed his eyes. Long before sleep had delivered him to this mysterious village, and so with slow, reverent steps, he followed the lantern-lit road, his senses heightened. The air thick with the fragrance of unseen flowers, the ground soft beneath his feet, as though the earth itself carried memory. And every breath seemed to draw him deeper into something ancient, something sacred, until at last he reached the threshold of a vast courtyard where time itself seemed to pause. And there, beneath an arch carved from stone that shimmered faintly, as though dusted with starlight, he understood without needing words that he had arrived at the place where the dream's secret heart awaited him. And so the boy, standing at the edge of the dream village, realized that every breath he drew in that place carried with it not only the fragrance of forgotten flowers but also the echoes of stories that had never been told aloud, as though the land itself was waiting for someone brave enough to listen, brave enough to remember, and he wondered if perhaps that someone had always been him, destined not by blood or by fate but by the simple act of arriving in a place where the stars bent lower than the roofs of the cottages and the shadows of lanterns stretched longer than the paths of waking life. And as this thought filled him, the air shimmered once more with the same slow rhythm of a heartbeat too vast to belong to one chest alone, a heartbeat that belonged to the village itself. And the boy felt that pulse guiding him toward the narrow alleyways where voices seemed to hum without mouths, where doorways breathed warmth without opening, and where lanterns tilted ever so slightly, as though bowing in welcome or in warning. He could not tell which, but still he walked, each step lengthening into a journey he could not turn back from. Each stone of the path whispering beneath his feet with a texture unlike any road he had ever known, softer, older, as if shaped from memory itself. And in that unbroken flow of walking he began to notice how the air grew thicker with something like anticipation, how every lantern flame leaned toward him like an eye-catching sight of its long-awaited guest. And then, suddenly, the road curved into a vast square he had not seen before, a square that seemed to be the center of the village, though no map, no signpost, no logic of space could explain why it had taken so long to arrive there. And in the center of this square stood a fountain, though no water ran through it, no stone figure adorned it, for the fountain was instead filled with light, a pool of shifting radiance that spilled upward rather than down, rising into the night air like liquid dawn, and the boy could not look away, his heart hammering to the rhythm of that impossible fountain, for within the currents of light he thought he saw faces, countless faces drifting like reflections upon water, some smiling, some weeping, some whispering in languages he did not understand, and yet all of them familiar, as though they belonged to dreams he had once dreamed but could not recall. And the longer he gazed, the more he felt the stirring of something deep within him, something vast, a recognition that those faces were not strangers but fragments of him, of everyone, of lives that had slipped between the cracks of memory and were now held safely here, preserved in the light of a fountain that no waking village could ever claim. And as he stood trembling at the edge of it, the lanterns surrounding the square flickered in unison, their flames rising higher, and a hush fell over everything, as though the entire village had drawn a single breath and held it, waiting for him to act, to step forward, to choose. And though he wanted to flee, though some part of him screamed, that to walk closer meant to risk never leaving. His feet betrayed him, carrying him toward the fountain until the glow touched his skin, seeping through his pores like warmth in winter, and he gasped, for with that touch came voices, soft and endless, the murmurs of forgotten dreams brushing against his mind, telling him of lives unlived, of roads not taken, of words left unsaid, of love abandoned at the threshold of fear. And he staggered, overwhelmed, but the fountain did not relent, pouring into him all the sorrow and wonder of 1,000 unchosen fates, until tears streamed down his cheeks, though he could not name whether they belonged to him or to those countless others who now spoke through him. And in that flood of light, he suddenly understood why the village existed, why the lanterns still burned even though no hands tended them. This place was the keeper of everything that might have been, the sanctuary of forgotten possibilities, and he, a wandering boy, had stumbled into its sacred heart, not by chance, but because he too carried unspoken dreams, because he too bore the weight of all that he had left behind in the waking world. And the fountain had called him here not simply to witness but to remember on behalf of all who could not. And as this truth settled into him, heavy yet luminous, the fountain surged brighter, its light swelling until it seemed the entire square was filled with dawn, and in that brightness he saw not only the faces of others but his own, multiplied and shifting, versions of himself that had laughed when he had remained silent, that had dared when he had retreated, that had loved when he had hidden, and each self gazed back at him not with judgment, but with quiet recognition, as though saying, "We are you, we are your forgotten lanterns, and still we burn." And though the boy trembled before the sight of his countless reflections, each one shimmering with choices he had not taken, he did not turn away. For to turn away would have meant to abandon them once more to silence, and the very air of the square seemed to lean toward him, urging him not to flee but to listen, to let the murmurs settle into the marrow of his bones. And so he stood, breathing with the rhythm of the fountain, allowing its light to thread itself into his veins until his pulse echoed the same cadence as the village heartbeat. And when he closed his eyes, he found that the square did not vanish but deepened, as though the fountain of light had poured itself behind his eyelids, revealing not darkness but an endless expanse of luminous corridors, each one lined with doors that pulsed like sleeping hearts. And behind each door he sensed a story, not written, not spoken, but waiting. He stepped inward, or perhaps it was the fountain that drew him in, and soon he found himself walking along one of those radiant corridors, its walls whispering as if woven from breath, and though he touched nothing, the air itself responded to him, as if his presence stirred forgotten pages into motion. The first door he passed trembled faintly and then cracked open, spilling a pale silver glow, and he could not resist peering within. What he saw was himself, younger than he was now, sitting beneath a tree he half remembered, the bark warm against his back, the grass trembling in a summer wind, and in his hands he held a book he had once carried everywhere, a book he had since lost. In this vision, however, he turned the pages with rapt attention, his lips moving as though whispering each word into being, and he realized that this was a version of himself who had never misplaced that book, who had read every line until the stories became part of his breath. He drew back, shaken, but as he stepped away, the door sealed itself, as though the vision had only wanted to remind him of what had slipped away. Another door quivered nearby, and against his will he looked inside again. This time he saw himself older, standing on a shore at dawn, his feet sinking into wet sand as waves pulled against him, and beside him stood someone he knew yet did not tan. Indistinct figure with eyes bright as morning, a companion he had once wished for but never found, and in this vision he spoke freely, laughed without hesitation, as though loneliness had never been his shadow. He clenched his fists, both longing and sorrow searing through him, for this was not the life he had lived, but a life that might have been. The corridor seemed endless, each door calling to him with the weight of 1,000 possibilities, and he realized then that the fountain had not shown him faces, only to dazzle him. It was giving him passage into the archive of what could have been, inviting him to witness the echoes of his unchosen steps. But the deeper he went, the heavier he felt, as though carrying not just his own forgotten lives, but those of countless others. The corridors stretching wider, vaster, until he was certain no single heart could endure such weight. And yet he walked on. At length he came to a door, unlike the other's staller, darker and trembling, not with light but with shadow. Where the other doors pulsed like gentle hearts, this one shuddered, as though barely containing something vast. He hesitated, but the pull was irresistible. When he touched it, the door did not open in silence. It cracked with the sound of thunder, muffled by distance, and from within spilled not silver light but a deep, amber glow like fire trapped behind glass. He stepped forward and found himself in a space that was not a room at all, but an open plain beneath the blood-orange sky. There, in the center of the plain, stood a figure cloaked in darkness, tall and indistinct, its outline flickering like smoke. Yet the boy felt no fearingly recognition, for this was not a stranger, but a shadow he had carried within himself all his life, a version of him that had gathered every anger, every bitterness, every silence that had ever wounded him. The figure raised its head, and though its face was veiled, he knew it was his own. The shadow spoke, though no mouth moved, its voice resonating directly in his chest. "You left me here. You denied me. You tried to forget me. But I am you as much as any laughter, any dream. I am every word you swallowed. I am every step you never dared. And here, in this place of forgotten lanterns, I burn still." The boy faltered, wanting to protest, to deny it, but the longer he gazed, the more truth he saw, the truth that he had always turned away from the darker parts of himself, pretending they did not exist, pushing them into silence. But here, in the dream village, even shadows had their lanterns, even pain had its place in the archive of what had been left behind. He stepped closer. The shadow did not move away. For the first time, he reached out, not to banish, not to fight, but simply to acknowledge. His hand passed through the figure, and instead of cold he felt warmth, a heavy sorrow that softened as it met his touch. And in that moment the shadow did not vanish but dissolved, folding into him like smoke into air. And he realized that he had not been meant to fight this part of himself, but to accept it, to carry it, for only then could the lanterns burn with their true light. The plane vanished, the corridor returned, but now the doors no longer weighed upon him as they had. Instead he felt lighter, though his eyes still brimmed with tears. He walked on, no longer afraid of what he might see. One door opened onto laughter he had lost, another onto grief he had buried, another onto courage he had forgotten, and with each vision, he did not cling nor recoil, he simply bore witness, acknowledging the endlessness of who he was, and who he had never been, at last. The corridor narrowed, leading him back to the fountain square. The lights still surged, faces still shimmered, but now he understood. They did not need to be chosen or reclaimed, for they already lived within him. The lanterns burned not to demand but to remind, and as he stepped into the glow once more, the voices softened, their countless murmurs settling into a single harmony, like a lullaby sung across 1,000 throats. And the boy, standing there bathed in dawnlight that was not dawn, felt something he had not felt since the very first step into the dream village: peace. Not because he had solved the mystery, not because he had found an ending, but because he had learned that even what is forgotten is never truly lost, that the village would always keep burning its lanterns, and that within him too, those flames would endure. As I held the lantern close, its glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, each flicker peeling back another layer of silence that had long concealed something vital. And soon the air around me shimmered as though the night itself were unraveling, folding open to reveal not streets and houses but a vast canvas of memory, stretching wide and deep like an ocean beneath the stars. And I found myself no longer standing in the dream village but walking down a road I half recognized. A dirt path bordered by tall grasses swaying in a wind that carried the scent of earth after rain. And though no one walked beside me, I felt the presence of unseen companions, echoes of lives once tied to mine, shadows of laughter and sorrow interwoven, urging me onward. And in the shifting horizon ahead, I saw a child running barefoot, their small hands clutching something fragile, a paper bird perhaps, fluttering as if alive. And with a jolt I realized the child was me, or some younger version of me, radiant with innocence, eyes wide with the unbroken wonder of the world. And I wanted to call out, to warn them of all that was to come, yet my voice dissolved into the breeze, unheard, unneeded. For the memory was not meant to be changed, but to be seen, to be remembered. And as the younger me reached a small wooden bridge crossing a stream, they paused, kneeling to set the paper bird afloat upon the water, whispering words I could not yet hear, and then turning away as the bird drifted downstream, carrying their hopes, their promise, their unspoken prayer into the unknown. And in that instant I felt the truth blaze within me that this act, small and forgotten in the rush of life, had bound me to something greater, that the bird was not just a child's game but an offering, a vow to the world of dreams itself. A vow I had since forgotten, and the lantern in my hands glowed hotter, brighter, until the paper bird itself seemed to materialize from its flame, drifting around me in radiant light, whispering the words the child had once spoken. I will return when called. I will remember what others forget. I will carry the stories that no one else can hold. And my knees buckled at the weight of it, for this vow uttered in innocence had tied me irrevocably to the village of dreams, making me not a stranger wandering into its mysteries but a promised witness, one who had always belonged. And as the vision dissolved, pulling me back into the lantern-lit streets, the figure with shadowed face was still there, watching, their silence now filled with gravity. And they spoke at last with a voice steady as stone. Now you see why you were chosen. It was never chance, it was memory. and though my chest ached with the enormity of it, though fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve, I clutched the lantern to my heart and whispered into the night, "Then I will not turn away." The night in the village had grown deeper, the kind of darkness that feels alive, humming with secrets just beyond reach. And as I stood holding the lantern, its glow trembling with the weight of my vow, the silence broke with the faint sound of footsteps, soft yet deliberate, as though someone was walking not on stone or soil, but upon the fragile surface of memory itself. And from the corner of my eye I glimpsed movement, shadows unraveling to reveal figures I had not expected, or perhaps fragments of them, emerging slowly from doorways that had long seemed sealed, their faces pale as candle wax, their eyes shimmering with a dreamlike haze, and though their mouths never moved, I heard their voices inside my head, layered like a chorus carried on the wind. The vow has been awakened. The bearer has returned. The circle is whole again. A chill slid down my spine as more and more of them appeared, gathering in the square, each holding lanterns like mine, yet none of their flames were steady, instead swaying as though guided by some hidden rhythm. And when I raised my own lantern, the entire square lit up, flickers of light weaving together like threads on a loom, painting the air with patterns that shifted into symbols, strange and ancient, symbols I felt I should know, as though they had been carved into the marrow of my bones long before I was born. And as I stared at them, they began to pulse, each beat tugging at my chest, urging me toward something deeper. The figure with the shadowed face moved forward at last, stepping into the circle of villagers, and with a gesture, they pointed not to me but to the ground, where cracks began to appear, glowing faintly, widening until the cobblestones themselves split apart to reveal a spiral staircase descending into the earth, its edges lined with lanterns that burned not with flame but with liquid light, like molten dreams flowing endlessly downward. And the chorus of voices rose again, filling my mind with words I barely understood. The bearer must descend, for beneath the village lies the first memory, the seed from which all others grew. My hand tightened around the lantern, fear curling through me like smoke. But something deeper, a pull older than fear itself, compelled me toward the staircase. And as I placed my foot on the first step, the villagers parted silently, their lanterns swaying as if bowing in recognition, and I realized with both awe and dread that the village was no longer just a place, it was an initiation, a passageway into the heart of forgotten dreams, and I had only just begun to step inside. Its truth, the spiral staircase wound deeper and deeper, each step echoing as though I were not alone, though no one followed me, and the walls that enclosed me seemed less like stone and more like a living surface, pulsing faintly, veined with threads of light that resembled constellations rearranging themselves with every breath I took, and the lantern in my hand flickered, casting long shadows that stretched ahead, merging with the glow of the liquid lanterns embedded along the path, so that it felt less like a descent into earth and more like falling into the spine of a dream itself. The deeper I went, the louder a sound became, soft at first, like the murmur of waves against a distant shore, but then layered with whispers, fragments of voices that overlapped and intermingled, voices of men and women, children and elders, all speaking at once, not in fear or anger, but in tones heavy with memory, as though their words were the weight that kept this hidden place alive. I could not make sense of the language, yet my heart recognized it, each syllable pressing against some forgotten chamber of my mind, urging me to remember something I had never consciously known. At last, the staircase opened into a vast underground chamber, and what I saw made me draw in a sharp breath. The ceiling arched high above like the dome of a cathedral. Yet instead of stone, it was made of woven light, strands of glowing threads, cascading downward like vines, and in the center of the chamber stood a tree unlike any tree of the waking world, its trunk carved from crystal, its branches heavy with lanterns that dripped liquid fire into a pool at its roots, and each drop rippled outward, carrying images across the water faces of people I had never seen, landscapes of places I had never visited, events I had never lived yet somehow recognized as my own. My knees nearly buckled at the weight of it, for this was not merely a tree. It was the living archive of the village, the heart of every dream it had ever carried, and as I stepped closer, the whispers grew louder until they were no longer whispers but a symphony of voices layered across centuries, and in the reflection of the glowing pool, I saw myself not as I was now, but as I had been in countless other lives, each one holding the same lantern, each one standing here in this very chamber, each one faced with the same choice, to carry the dreams forward, or to let them wither. My breath trembled as I realized the village was not trapped in time, it was time itself, cycling endlessly, drawing back those who had once been bearers, calling them home when the circle was ready to turn again, and tonight, that circle had chosen me. I stood before the crystal tree, its branches swaying without wind, its lanterns humming with a frequency that seemed to resonate with the very rhythm of my heartbeat. And as I reached out, my fingers brushed against one of the glowing vessels, warm as living skin, and in that instant the chamber dissolved around me, replaced by visions that surged through my mind like a floodgate breaking open, visions of the villagers walking beneath moonlight, of their laughter at twilight feasts, of their sorrows when loved ones slipped away, of births, of farewells, of dances in rain that fell not from clouds but from dreams themselves, and with each vision I felt as though my own soul was expanding, stretching across lifetimes, merging with stories that were never mine yet belonged to me all the same, for the tree was revealing what it meant to be part of the circle, a bearer not of one life but of all lives tethered to the village's existence. My knees sank into the luminous soil as the pool at the roots glowed brighter, its ripples rising like mist, wrapping around me until it felt as if I were breathing both air and memory. And then a voice not spoken, but resonating within me, a question I could not ignore: will you remember for them? Will you carry what others have forgotten? Will you protect the lanterns when shadows seek to snuff them out? The enormity of the choice trembled through me, for I knew instinctively that once accepted, it could never be undone, that I would be bound not only to the village but to every dream it had ever held, and with a steadying breath I whispered yes, though no sound escaped my lips, and in response, the lantern I had touched flared with brilliance, releasing a drop of liquid fire that fell into the pool, sending a shockwave of light across the chamber. And suddenly I was standing again beneath the night sky of the village, the stars burning, brighter than I had ever seen them, and in my hand the lantern pulsed as though alive, its glow richer, deeper, carrying within it not only my own dreams but countless others, and as I lifted it, the villagers emerged from the shadows, watching, their eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude, because I had chosen to carry their forgotten dreams, to keep the cycle unbroken. And as the night deepened, I realized that the village would never again feel like a place I wandered into by accident, but rather a home I had been returning to across lifetimes, drawn by a promise older than memory. Sealed in the light of a single flame, the lantern in my hand pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a second heart, and as I stood beneath the canopy of starlight, the village seemed to breathe with me, every stone, every lantern, every face woven together in an unseen harmony, and though I felt the weight of countless dreams pressing within the vessel I carried, there was no burden, only a strange lightness, as if those forgotten fragments of lives had always been waiting to find a guardian. The villagers, who once appeared spectral and distant, now glowed with a warmth I had never noticed, their movements fluid, their laughter soft yet resonant. And when one of them, a woman with silver-threaded hair and eyes deep as the sea, forward, I sensed that she was not greeting me as a stranger, but welcoming me back, as though I had always belonged. She reached for the lantern in my hand, but did not touch it, merely bowed her head and whispered, not with sound, but with thought, "You are no longer a wanderer. You are a bearer now, and the village is your shadow as much as your light." At her words, the houses themselves seemed to lean closer, their windows flickering with memory. And I realized that the village was not built of stone and timber alone, but of the very stories bound within the lanterns, shifting and reshaping with each dream preserved. My steps carried me toward the heart of the square, where the fountain gushed, not water but a silvery stream of light, its surface rippling with visions that lured me closer. And when I gazed into it, I saw not only the villagers' histories, but fragments of my own childhood dreams I had long abandoned, faces of people I had forgotten, paths never taken but alive within possibility. And the sight was overwhelming, yet also grounding, for it reminded me that to carry dreams was not to bear only others, but to remember myself. And as the villagers gathered around the fountain, a hush fell, and the woman with silver-threaded hair raised her hand to the stars. And one by one the lanterns above us flared brighter, their glow converging into a dome of light that sealed the village in radiance. And I understood then that this was their way of teaching me that every dream carried, every story remembered, added to the shelter of the village, a shield against the nothingness beyond, where forgotten things went to vanish. As the dome of light shimmered above, I felt the air thicken with something sacred, like time itself had slowed to a gentle crawl. And the villagers began to hum in unison, their voices weaving together into a sound that was not song nor prayer, but something older, something primal, a resonance that vibrated deep within my bones. The fountain's silver stream responded, rising in arcs of light that spiraled upward, and in those arcs I saw fragments of countless lives, dreams both tender and tragic, a child chasing fireflies through a meadow that no longer existed, a sailor yearning for the shore he never returned to, a mother holding a child who would never wake. Each vision brushed against me, and for a moment I was not myself, I was them. I lived their joys, their losses, their hopes that had slipped away from the waking world but still pulsed here, eternal in the lanterns. And then, as if the village itself had been waiting for me to be ready, the humming faded, replaced by silence so profound it was almost deafening. And the silver-haired woman spoke aloud this time, her voice carrying like wind across water. The lanterns are not only memory, but mirrors. They show us what was, what might have been, and what still waits to be born. But beware, the more you gaze, the more they gaze into you. Her eyes, gleaming with an ancient weight, held mine, and I felt the lantern in my hand pulse again, harder. Now, its light flickering with unrest, as though aware of the warning she had spoken. The villagers parted, and from the fountain's edge a figure emerged, cloaked in shadows that clung to him like smoke, and though his face was hidden, the aura he carried chilled the air, and I knew instinctively that he, too, was a bearer but not of light. The villagers lowered their heads in fear as the figure's presence grew, and for the first time since stepping into the dream village, I felt the unmistakable taste of dread. The silver-haired woman's hand brushed mine, steadying, and she whispered only one word, "Shadowbearer." The word lingered in the air like a curse, and as the villagers recoiled, I realized that the dream village was not only a sanctuary of forgotten hopes, but also a battlefield between two forces, those who guarded light and those who harvested shadow. The shadow-bearer moved with slow, deliberate steps, and wherever his cloak brushed the ground, the glow of the lanterns dimmed, their steady flames trembling as though threatened by an unseen wind. His presence felt wrong, not in the way of a nightmare one forgets upon waking, but in the way of something that does not belong, something that feeds on absence rather than presence. When he stopped before me, I felt the weight of his attention pierce through the veil of shadow, and though I could not see his face, I knew his gaze was fixed on the lantern I carried. "It should not be yours," his voice cracked like dry wood, low and resonant, carrying a bitterness that seemed centuries old. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, her shoulders squared, her lantern lifted like a shield of light, and the villagers began to hum again, this time, faster, sharper, as though trying to hold the darkness at bay. But the shadow-bearer only raised a hand, and with it, the sound faltered, caught in his palm and crushed into silence. He turned toward me again. "Every dream has its weight," he said. "Every forgotten hope leaves behind a shadow, and shadows do not forgive those who try to leave them behind." My lantern flared wildly, as though answering him, its golden pulse fighting against the pull of his presence. And for the first time, I understood. This lantern was not just a vessel of light. It was a fragment of someone's abandoned dream, perhaps even my own. The shadow-bearer stretched out his hand, palm open, waiting for me to surrender it. And in that moment, the entire village seemed to hold its breath. I clutched the lantern tighter, its trembling light spilling across my hands as though pleading with me not to let go. And in the charged silence of the village, I realized this was not merely a choice of holding or surrendering, it was a choice between belonging to the light or being consumed by the shadow. The shadow-bearer's outstretched hand hung between us like a horizon line, dividing two futures, and though fear pressed on me like a heavy cloak, something deep within whispered that dreams, even forgotten ones, were never meant to be handed over to darkness. The silver-haired woman's voice broke through the silence, steady and clear. "Do not give him what he craves. Shadows grow only when light is abandoned." Her words sparked courage, fragile but alive, and as I raised the lantern higher, Its glow stretched outward, washing over the village in defiance. The shadow-bearer recoiled slightly, as though the radiance carried a memory he could not bear to face, yet his form remained steady and menacing, his cloak writhing like smoke that refused to disperse. The villagers began humming again, this time with the rhythm that surged like the beating of many hearts, and slowly the lanterns along the streets responded, flaring brighter, igniting one after another, until the entire village seemed to breathe light in unison. Shadows hissed and twisted, retreating from doorways, alleys, and rooftops, but the shadow-bearer did not vanish. Instead, he lowered his hand and whispered words that cut like ice. "You may resist me here, but dreams fade, and when they do, shadows remain." Then, with a swirl of darkness, he dissolved into the air, leaving behind a silence so sharp it almost rang. My body trembled, but the lantern in my hands burned steady now, no longer trembling, as if it had decided alongside me. Yet deep within, a new unease stirred. For the shadow-bearer's words hinted at something larger, that this village, this fragile realm of forgotten dreams, was not eternal. Light could hold shadows back, but only for as long as the dream itself endured. The silence that followed his vanishing was not the silence of peace, but of breath held too long. A silence where every villager's eyes seemed to ask the same question. Had they truly driven him away, or had they only delayed his return? The humming subsided slowly, leaving only the echo of footsteps as the silver-haired woman approached me. Her lantern was dimmer than before, its light flickering faintly as though weakened by the shadow-bearer's presence, but her gaze was steady, carrying the weight of centuries. "You must understand what you've seen," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "The shadow-bearer is no ordinary phantom. He is the remnant of dreams abandoned, of promises broken, of light left unattended." Her words coiled through me, filling the air with a truth that felt older than stone. The villagers gathered close, their lanterns lifted like tiny stars trembling in the night. And one of them, a boy with eyes brighter than his flickering flames, spoke in a whisper. "He was once one of us." Gasps rippled through the circle, though they sounded rehearsed, as though this revelation was not new but had been repeated across generations, a truth too painful to silence but too dangerous to shout. The woman nodded. "Long ago, before you walked these streets, he carried a lantern too. His flame was strong, perhaps stronger than all others, but he grew impatient. He sought to bend the dream to his will, to carve it into his shape, rather than protect what it wished to become. The lantern resisted, as they always do, for dreams are not possessions, they are guardians of their own light. In his anger, he shattered his lantern and fed on its broken glow. What remained of him was not man, not dream, not shadow, but something caught between." Her voice faltered, and for the first time, I saw sorrow break her composure. The villagers bowed their heads, and I felt the weight of their grief settle over us all. I looked down at the lantern in my own hands and understood this was not merely a vessel of light, but a living memory, one that could either be cherished and guarded or twisted and lost forever. The boy's whisper came again, trembling but resolute. "That is why he hunts us. He cannot bear that our lanterns still live while his has turned to ash." As the villagers nodded in solemn agreement, I felt the faintest tremor in the lantern I carried, as though it too had heard and remembered. as though it too feared the fate of its broken kin. The air in the square grew heavier, as though unseen. Threads of memory were tightening around us, binding past and present into one fragile moment. The villagers did not disperse after the shadow-bearer's departure. Instead, they closed in, forming a circle around me and my flickering lantern. Their eyes reflected the trembling light, wide with both fear and expectation, and I realized that I was no longer a guest here but something else entirely, answer to a question they had carried for lifetimes. The silver-haired woman's voice cut through the hush, steady and deliberate. "You must understand, your coming was not chance. Long before you entered this dream, your presence was written. The village has awaited one who carries a flame, unclouded by bitterness. A flame still young enough to bend, yet strong enough to endure. You are that one." Her words pressed against me like an invisible weight, and for a moment I wished to deny them, to insist that I was merely lost, wandering, undeserving of such prophecy. But as I looked at the lantern, I saw within it a spark that did not belong to me. Alone it pulsed with echoes of voices I had never heard, memories of paths I had never walked, as though countless dreamers before me had entrusted their fragments of hope to this single light. The boy who had spoken earlier stepped forward now, his small hands clutching his lantern as though it were his very heartbeat. "We cannot fight him," he whispered. "Our flames are too weak. Every time he returns, we lose more of ourselves. But you are different." Murmurs rose around the circle, voices layering like a chant, soft but insistent. The keeper, the dream bearer, the flame that will not break. My chest tightened with both fear and wonder, for their faith felt overwhelming, too vast to hold. Yet deep inside, beneath the doubt, there stirred something steady, a quiet recognition that perhaps I had always been walking toward this moment. Even before I had ever heard the name of this village, the silver-haired woman lifted her lantern high, its dim flame flaring as though in agreement. The shadow-bearer can only be undone when his hunger is met not with fear but with light strong enough to remind him of what he once was. Your lantern holds that power, though you do not yet know how to wield it. That is why you are here. That is why the dream allowed you to find us. Her words burned through me like a quiet fire, and though the night pressed close, I felt a rising certainty that the path ahead, treacherous and shrouded in mystery, was mine to walk. The night was silent, yet alive, as if the very fabric of dreams leaned closer to listen. The villagers guided me beyond the square, through narrow pathways carved between houses that seemed older than memory itself, until we reached the hill that overlooked all of Dream's End. At its peak stood a stone circle, weathered and cracked, glowing faintly with inscriptions that pulsed like veins of light beneath the earth. The silver-haired woman raised her lantern, and the circle responded, humming with a resonance that trembled through my bones. "This is where the echo flame must be awakened," she whispered, her voice both reverent and weary. "It is the last light capable of standing against the shadow-bearer." My steps faltered, for the air was thick with power, and I felt suddenly small, more than a wanderer caught in a tide too immense to escape. Yet as the boy placed his tiny hand in mine, his lantern glowing faintly against the dark, I found strength I had not known before. One by one, the villagers placed their lanterns at the edges of the circle, forming a ring of trembling stars. Their flames, though dim, flickered in unison, as though responding to some hidden rhythm older than time. The silver-haired woman began to chant, a low melody of words I could not understand, yet the sound resonated within me as if I had always known them. The circle brightened, runes flaring, and I was guided to the center where my lantern's glow joined with theirs. At once, the light surged upward, spiraling into the sky, splitting the night like a crack of dawn. The village below seemed to vanish, replaced by endless shadows stretching in all directions, and there, from the horizon of that darkness, he came the shadow-bearer, vast and terrible, a figure woven of all fears left unspoken. His presence pressed upon us like an ocean, extinguishing breath itself. Yet the circle held. The villagers' lanterns burned, not with defiance, but with unity, each flame lending strength to the next. I raised my lantern, and for the first time, it did not flicker. The spark within had become steady, fierce, alive. The shadow-bearer's voice rolled across the void, low and mournful. Do you think your fragile lights can undo the hunger of eternity? My heart thundered, but I did not lower the flame. We do not stand alone, I said, though my voice shook. This village, these dreamers, and every soul that has carried a spark before Esau of them burn here, in this light. And with those words, the echo flame ignited. The world shuddered as the echo flame erupted, and for a moment the night itself seemed to recoil. The shadow-bearer stepped closer, his form shifting like smoke, his edges dissolving and reforming, as though he were born from every fear that had ever lived in silence. His eyes, if they could be called that, were hollow wells, swallowing light, swallowing hope. Around me, the villagers trembled, yet none broke the circle. Their lanterns flickered, wavered, then steadied, as if the bond between them had grown unbreakable. The silver-haired woman lifted her face toward the darkness and cried out in the old tongue, her voice defiant and unshaken. The sound carried like thunder, though it was not rage but harmony, like a melody reminding the stars of their forgotten music. The shadow-bearer roared, a sound that shattered the air, shaking the ground beneath us, and the circle's runes flared, spilling arcs of golden fire into the void. My lantern burned hotter, its light pressing against my skin, as though demanding something of me. I understood, though no one told me this was not a flame meant only to be carried. It was meant to be given, offered, poured out. I looked at the boy beside me, his lantern trembling but unbroken, his eyes wide with both terror and courage. He nodded, as if he too knew what was required. Together we stepped forward into the heart of the circle, our lanterns raised high. The flames within them rose, entwined and fused, bursting into a single stream of radiant fire that lanced toward the shadow-bearer. He staggered, not destroyed but weakened, his form unraveling in threads of smoke and night. The villagers' lanterns brightened in response, their flames linking into a chain of light so vast it felt like the whole of humanity stood behind us. Still, the shadow-bearer pressed forward, his voice a whisper now, almost sorrowful. You think you fight me, but I am part of you. I am the silence between your breaths, the weight behind your dreams. To unmake me is to unmake yourselves. His words lingered, and for a heartbeat I wavered. Could he be right? Was darkness not as essential as light? But then the silver-haired woman's hand touched my shoulder, grounding me. Her voice, steady and kind, whispered, Shadow is only shadow because light exists. Without us, he is nothing. And suddenly, I saw it. He was not eternal. He fed only on neglect, on despair, on those who forgot to kindle their sparks. The echo flame was not a weapon, it was a reminder. A reminder that no shadow could survive where light was shared. My lantern surged, no longer a mere flame but a blaze that poured out like dawn. The shadow bearer screamed, his form unraveling, dissolving, breaking into fragments of ash that scattered into the wind. The void began to crack, light spilling in from every direction, brighter and brighter, until the darkness itself seemed to surrender. When the last thread of the shadow bearer dissolved into the night, silence swept over the clearing, not a silence of dread, but of peace, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm when the air is cleansed, when the earth breathes again. The villagers lowered their lanterns, their faces bathed in the soft glow of dawn's first light. The silver-haired woman smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet relief. She looked at me as though I had always been meant to stand in that circle, as though every step of my journey had led me here. I felt no victory, only warmth, the warmth of belonging, of carrying a light that was no longer just my own. The boy beside me let out a trembling laugh, his small lantern flickering like a heartbeat. "We did it," he whispered, his voice both fragile and strong. And yet, in his words, I heard more than relief. I heard a promise that the flame would continue, passed from hand to hand, never to be forgotten again. The echo flame dimmed slowly, not extinguished but returning to its resting glow, a reminder rather than a blaze. It no longer pulsed with danger but with memory, holding within it the story of this night. I realized then that darkness would return someday, in some other form. Shadows are patient, but so too is light, and now the villagers knew, now I knew. We would always be enough to meet it. As the first rays of the sun broke across the horizon, painting the sky in tender shades of rose and gold, the villagers released their lanterns into the air. One by one they drifted upward, rising gently, like stars returning home. My lantern followed, leaving my hands soaring higher until it was just a glimmer in the morning light. And in that moment, I felt no fear of the night, no dread of the shadows that might linger. I felt only calm, for I understood now, the light was never meant to be kept. It was meant to be shared, to be trusted, to remind us that no matter how deep the darkness, dawn will always come. The silver-haired woman's voice lingered in my ear as the villagers embraced one another, as laughter replaced tears, as the world seemed to exhale. "Rest now," she whispered. "The flame is safe, and so are you." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the morning wash over me, and I felt myself drifting not into battle, not into fear, but into a quiet place beyond both shadow and light. A place of peace, a place of dreams. And as sleep claimed me, the last image I carried was of countless lanterns rising into the sky, each one a promise against the darkness, each one a reminder that light, once shared, never truly fades.
you.